I think looking at a photograph is a personal experience. You can't prescribe it. Everybody's going to have take a different meaning from it. And I think that is where the power lies.
I guess I think a photograph like captures one small moment of time and distills that down into something that can be very moving, because it's like all the other movements, all the other stuff that happens before or after that's kind of stripped away, and so you get to kind of, I don't know, really deeply examine that moment of time and see what it means to you.
I think watching a linear story, a video story, is in some ways a more passive experience than looking at a still photograph, because you are in some ways fed a series of ideas or information and whatnot, and with just a still image there's more for you to interpret, to fill in, to paint in your own mind. And that's one of the reasons we really like using the combination of still photography and audio. Not all the times, but in certain instances I think it can be more powerful, because you as a viewer become a part of that story just by trying to glue those two independent pieces together in your own mind.
Yeah, I definitely feel the same way and would echo that opinion. I think that with a still photograph or with audio, as the consumer, you're kind of painting in those holes, versus with video, it's being done for you. Not to say that you can't use video. I mean, I think video can be a very effective tool as well. I think it's Brian Storm who says, is it moving? Yes. Does it need to move? No. And so I think it's more just kind of figuring out like when is the right time to kind of use those video pieces to kind of move you through a piece, versus when is the right time to kind of create a still that allows the viewer to kind of paint in those empty spaces. Well, I could start a little bit with that. Yeah, so Benj and I started collaborating together while we were in college, and at that point we were combining, I was doing a lot of writing, and we were combining my writing with his photography, and we started out doing some work in the Arctic, in Norway, Greenland, and Iceland, and while we were there I had a little handheld recorder that I was just using for my interviews, so I didn't have to write everything down, and we were there, we were in the middle of all these amazing, at one point in the middle of all these amazing, we were working with Sami people, and we were in the middle of all these amazing reindeer herds that were full of thousands of animals that were stampeding around, and thought, oh my gosh, if we could capture that, like it would add something to these photos, it would really kind of help put people right there in the scene. And so we took my little, handheld recorder that was just a little cheap recorder. It wasn't meant to record sounds like that, but we did it anyway, and we brought those back, and we got a huge reaction from people. People loved hearing those reindeer, and so I think that was kind of the moment where we thought, wow, we can really use this to add something, and then we started to think, well, what if everything that we were using to tell the story as far as voices wasn't all in my voice? What if it was in the voices of the people that we're working with? And so we started to record other people's voices and not have everything through my voice. And so that's when we really I started to move from doing more of the traditional writing work into doing more of the audio work as well. And we kept blending that, and then you moved into video, and so it's kind of a constant evolving process.
Well, I think that's the great strength of collaboration, is to have those four hands and two brains in any situation that you're in. And I don't think that you have to be married for that to work. I think that's the beauty of just working with other people. And honestly, especially in multimedia storytelling, I don't really think it's possible to do it by yourself, because you're leaving too much behind. There are too many sacrifices you have to make just to decide what what pieces of any given situation you can capture. So.
Although I don't know, do you think we come back with different stories? Because I agree that we often have very different takes on a story, but I think that like it's more like it's kind of constantly like you're saying, I'm seeing this, what are you seeing? I'm seeing this, what are you seeing? And so it's like kind of like this constant collaboration, this constant like trying to come together of two stories that ends up building. It's kind of the sum of all parts, right? It ends up building something stronger than I could build as an individual, or that you could build as an individual. But it's not like you're building your own thing separately and I'm building my own thing separately. It's more that we're kind of trying to make those two things fit together the whole time.
I think just for us, we each have our own strengths. I mean, and this is something that we just run into with multimedia capture all the time, is that I still have this instinct of trying to create single frames that tell the full story, because in a print world, those are tremendously valuable, and they're frankly not very valuable when you're building multimedia sequences. Sarah, I think you have a really strong eye for details, which actually lends itself really beautifully to building video sequences. So,
What kind of details?
taking a scene and dividing it into pieces, because when you're cutting video, that's how you end up building a story, is by linking together a progression of images and ideas.
I think one way to kind of think about how we look at things differently is to talk about how we listen to music. Because when I listen to music, like I am listening to the words, like that's like I can, recite the words back to you, like I'm listening to the story of the song. And you like your favorite songs, you don't even know the words to, like you're listening to like the rhythm and the beat and the like the percussion and like how that all works and so I think that's kind of, for me with the story, it's kind of like, okay, what are all the pieces that we're trying to communicate, and like what, like what are the words, like how am I going to get the person to tell me the story? And for you, it's like kind of like, how can I create these visuals that will kind of carry the rhythm of the story along?
And that's the beauty of collaboration, I think, in so many ways, because at least speaking from my perspective, I'm not smart enough to be thinking in all those ways at one time, and so to have two people each having their own take on a story, I just think is a tremendous source of strength. I wouldn't say that we're cutting edge. I just think that the tools and the democratization of publishing is just expanding rapidly, and we're just kind of swept up in that current and excited to try new things when we learn about them. But there's always someone out there who is much farther down the road than you are in any given tool set, and personally, it's not about the technology, it's not about being cutting edge, it's about finding the right tool for the story that you're trying to tell. And that may be a new tool that hasn't been used much before, or it may be a very old tool. I don't think that necessarily really matters.
I think to me that it's much easier to learn the technology than it is to learn the storytelling. I feel like you can kind of learning Final Cut or anything like that is hard, but you can learn it. Like you can do that. I think the storytelling is the kind of thing that I'm going to spend the rest of my life learning how to tell a good story. Like that's not easy to learn how to do, and that's not the technology stuff. That's the old stuff that's been going on forever. So I think that's, I don't know, the technology isn't so hard. Although I do have to say, you're the one who's good at the technology and learning about that and keeping up with that. It's harder for me, but it's not as hard as the learning to tell a good story.
Well, that's the beautiful thing, is that there's no formula. If there was a formula, we could all go home and quit at 5 o'clock each day, because life would just be simple. What is story, I think, is the real question there. And for me, story is what you leave out. And I think with the media landscape right now, where there's so much more noise than there's ever been, so many new things to filter. I think the need for story is greater than it's ever been, because we're looking for filters, we're looking for narratives within just the world around us, and so it's an addictive challenge to try to find those, to tease those out from important issues and just from the chaos that kind of is the world around us.
I guess a more simple thing, I can't remember who says it, someone says that story is people, place, and trouble. I think that's a great kind of summary of what a story is.
For me, it's the process of reduction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Previous mistakes, but to answer your question, I don't think necessarily a professional can do it better, but I think a professional might be more reliable because they've tried a whole bunch of stuff and some of that has worked and some of that has not. But I don't think that necessarily means that someone who's never told a story before can't do it.
There are all kinds of like ways of telling stories too. Like, I'm always jealous when I'm out with someone, like you're at a bar or something, and they tell you a story about like, hey, guess what happened to me yesterday? And they tell this amazing story, and they're so good at like kind of like stepping you through this, like that, you know, they have like this build of suspense, and then they deliver the punchline, and then, you know, like they resolve it at the end. Like someone tells you this great story, and I've never been like particularly excellent at doing that, but somehow with the multimedia kind of, that I can, you know, I can attempt to do, and I do okay at it, you know, because I think there are lots of different ways of telling stories. Whether it's just like you're having a beer with someone and telling the story of what happened to you yesterday, or you're trying to tell, you know, the story of reindeer herders and what's going on with them and climate change.